My father was a shepherd. He was also a coal miner and a World War II prisoner of war. He was the one that taught me how to reinvent myself. And he also taught me about the power of the domino effect. One man making one decision that impacted the future of 3 generations that came after him, despite the odds that were stacked against him. The point is that we all have a role to play in something that is much bigger than ourselves. And if you don't like the way things are working out, then change them. It's as simple and complicated as that. The world is a very, very uncertain place. And we all have to go there to that place where we have to think about who we are, what we want to do, and what our ultimate purpose in life is. How does one begin that journey? Is there a blueprint for dreams? And what happens when what you think you wanted and think you should have doesn't actually work out the way you want it to be? So sometimes that path is concrete and it's made out of pavement and it's straight and it's narrow and you can see the end of it. And other times it's a lot like this. It's a little bit shaky, there's no foundation underneath it, there's nothing to hang on to, and when you kind of get to the end of it and you look out, it's just as murky and uncertain as it ever was. My path was a lot like that. And what I've come to learn is that I've had to face the things that most people fear, the unknown and the unforeseen. One of the things my dad taught me is that your life is made up of a sequence of very precise moments in your life. So it starts out and you're doing just fine and you're about 4 years old and you're quite happy as a little kid. And then one day your mom or your dad puts you in a car or on a bus and they take you to a place called school. And your life changes forever. As children, we came to accept that adults were the ones that made the decisions in our lives. And then things began to change. A young girl at a precise moment becomes a woman. And suddenly she's capable of creating life. At one precise moment in your lives, and each one of you, it's different for every single one of you, and it happens only once in your lifetime. The clock strikes midnight, and suddenly you're legally capable of voting and drinking and driving, and all of a sudden, when you come of age, you are responsible for the decisions you make in your life. You're going to cross a stage, and someone's going to say to you, "You've graduated." And as you progress along your life, somebody else is going to stand in front of you and say, "I now pronounce you man and wife." Or, "Congratulations, it's a boy." These things change your life, irreversibly and forever. It's 1 second. My defining moment came when someone said to me, "You have cancer, stage 3. That's not a very good thing, and you might want to think about putting your affairs in order. Wow, the C word. It terrifies most people. But honestly, in cancer's defense, it really is only following a very natural blueprint. Cancer is something that starts from within, from a very normal state. And that at one point, one moment in time, it suddenly goes out of control. And it begins to reproduce and concentrate only on its own survival and reproduction. And it does that, paradoxically, to the point where it not only destroys the very system that created it and supports it, but it supports itself. So I've always asked myself, what is the point of that? Why would nature have such a blueprint? And what lessons can we learn from that? In trying to answer that question, I started to wonder if there was something that could be done about getting in the way of a trajectory of a blueprint that was going someplace that didn't quite fit your needs or was in your best interest. So for example, how does one deal with a terrible cancer diagnosis? When I was faced with mortality at a very premature age, just like my dad was, I had some decisions that I had to make. And I had to choose whether I was actually going to fight or give in. I had to choose whether I wanted to try and be a survivor, or better still, maybe even a thriver. What I learned from that was not so much the physicality of the disease itself. What came out of the experience was this deep insight into what it really felt like to lose control. Control of who you are, what you are, and in my case, my very future. And I also started asking myself, why did it have to take such a drastic wake-up call for me to start to think about what my potential might be? So you're all going to travel that journey. You're all going to go through your lives, and some of you are going to come against trauma with a big T. I hope that many of you are only going to experience trauma with a little t. It actually doesn't matter. The point is that you're going to have to choose whether you get in the pathway of blueprints that aren't working for you. This is the way I did it. When you have trauma, you apply triage. You start to put together an emergency team. And there's 3 parts of that. The first one is that you take a pulse. Okay, you go deep inside and you take a look at what's in there that's making you wonder why you have to change. The second part is you start to treat the shock, because when you realize that there's something ugly in there, you're going to begin to be facing emotions that are very uncomfortable. Fear and guilt and shame and loss of control. What I learned was that it's okay to really feel those feelings and embrace them and say, I'm starting to understand what that's about. The third part of triage is to actually hand yourself over to a triage team. And in the case of personal reinvention, that can come in the form of family and friends, and it's amazing what kind of bandages and dressings that they offer you. So accept that help. My point is that getting to survivorship is actually about letting other people help you. When you come and accept the fact that the reinvention part is actually realizing that you've got to deal with a real deep systemic change, you can move to sustained treatment. And for me, I use this cancer analogy a lot. That also has 3 steps for me. The first one is to cut out the tumor. Okay, so now that you've kind of figured out what that ugly thing is that's inside of you, go back in there and find out how you're going to cut it out, modify it, or learn to manage it. The second part of treatment is reaching out to everything that's out there that's available to you, the traditional methods that are available to help you reinvent yourself. In the cancer analogy, that would be things like chemotherapy and radiation. For personal reinvention, it's things like the Myers-Briggs tools, the Gallup Strength Finders, Enneagrams, career assessment tools. There's a lot of those traditional things out there that will help you understand who you are. Because if you don't understand who you are, you can't reinvent yourself. So go out there, find them, and use them. If you're comfortable with that and you want to take it a little step further, then add some complementary therapies. So I still use those tools. I still use things like meditation and visualization and journaling. Those are the kinds of things that help you understand who you are. And if you're comfortable with it, take it a little step further and push yourself outside your comfort zone and do things like stand in a meadow with a horse, or go to a classical concert, or sing your heart out and dance your heart out. Right? It's those things that really begin to make you understand what excites you, what your passion is about, and alternately what bores you to death, because that's important to know too. 8 years after that, I was re-diagnosed with a completely different cancer. And any way you look at that, that really sucks. And I thought, I had it figured out. And what I actually learned was that I had a lot more to learn. And one of those lessons was that cancer was smart enough to reinvent itself too. And that made me start thinking about other things that are in a constant state of division and modification and growth and change. Things like family structures, communities, businesses, organizations. And this idea of cancer taking hold made me think of whether there were other blueprints that we could probably get in the way of. So taking the cancer analogy just a little bit further, that it's a cell from within that suddenly for some unknown reason decides to go rogue, might that be what's happening with our families and our communities and our businesses? Maybe what we have to do is take a different kind of pulse. Or maybe what we have to do is treat a bigger aftershock. Or maybe it's about getting a really huge triage team together. Because if we begin to learn to step out of our immediate needs and put together a broader, higher purpose, I think that we then have a tool that will allow us to step into the trajectory of very dangerous blueprints that I think are leading the human race to its own destruction. I've heard a lot of people say to me, well, cancer was the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm not so sure that I would ever say that, but I can tell you that it definitely changed my life, and it made me see things from a different perspective. What it did do was give me some basic rules, and I still use those today when I have to face really tough stuff. So those are things like, there are no blanket cures. There's no black and white answer for anything. This work is really, really tough, okay? It takes energy, it takes dedication, and you just have to keep at it. There are going to be good days, there's going to be bad days. You will need a support team. You cannot reinvent yourself on your own. And as you continue along that journey, you're also going to have to make decisions, a whole bunch of different decisions. And no matter how good you think those decisions are at the time that you make them, you're going to always doubt whether they were the right ones. My cancer challenge helped me define my purpose. And what I'd like to do is pass that challenge on to you. I want you to say, try me instead of why me. I want you to think about the fact that each and every single one of you do have a role to play in something very, very much bigger than you. And that any difficulty you're going to face is the catalyst for your personal transformation. It's that challenge that's going to catalyze you to change. Your body is an incredibly fragile thing. I learned that. But I also learned that it's flexible, it's adaptable, and it's incredibly intelligent. So trust your gut. Find your strength. And forget about the weaknesses. Forget about them. And once you've identified what those strengths are, do everything you can to blow them out of the water, right? So what does that mean? Is there a cancer in your workplace that you've got to get rid of? Is there a blueprint that you need to remodify around a relationship? Is there a way that you can get more involved in your community to have a bigger impact? A wise man once told me that if you could reach out and touch one single person in your lifetime, your purpose on this earth has been completed. And I've never forgotten that. And I've actually come to believe that it's in changing other people and helping other people and getting beyond yourself that you actually begin to repurpose yourself. Repurposing. I call it reinvention. So, I invite you to go out to the edge of the cliff and stand at the very edge with confidence and with control. And know that there's nothing out there that is stronger than your own passion, your memories, your experiences, what you believe in, and your curiosity. But I also want to ask you to check in. Stand there and check in and check your ego and say to yourself, am I acting like a cancer cell? And am I doing that at the expense that everything that is important to me is ultimately going to be destructed? So I believe in the power of intent. And I think if you believe that, and you truly do, then I think anything can happen for you. Thank you.